Welcome to our discussion of Parshat Korach, just like Moses. Today I'd like to examine the words of the Torah's Moshe, the Chassam Sofer, great rabbi of Hungary, 19th century, and his very clever weaving of the Parsha, Gemara, Tanakh all together, and let's see what point emerges from it. Quotes a strange medrash. Medrash says, Shehela Shaul et Shmuel, Ali de Balasov, when Shaul, King Saul, brought up Shmuel, Prophet Samuel, from the dead, or maybe it looked like it, Va'amra Ra'isi Elokim, she said, I see a God coming up, a judge coming up. So she probably meant she saw an important person, a leader, Nasib Amcha, Kimlod Kalel. She saw Shmuel coming up, an important person. However, Elokim can also mean Elohim, judge. She saw judgment, justice. Hayayarem Yom Adin. The Medrash says he was afraid of the day of judgment. Lakach Moshe Rabbeinu Moshe Yidalav Shloshina Osachas Me'ator. He brought Moshe with him to testify that he hadn't changed one letter of the Torah. That's what the Medrash says. What? Shmuel is afraid of judgment? Why should Shmuel be afraid of judgment? Shmuel is one of the greatest tzaddikim, righteous people that we ever had. We say every Shabbos morning, Friday night, Moshe v'Aaron b'choana v'Shmuel b'korei shema. There's Moshe and Aaron and there's Shmuel. They call to God and God answers them. Shmuel's on the same level, almost like Moshe Rabbeinu. It's unbelievable what level Shmuel's on. He's worried about judgment? What kind of judgment? So, Chassam Sofer says, or Moshe Sofer, he says, well, Shmuel was a prophet, so he knows the future. After all, he's in the true world, the Olam Emes, in the afterlife, so he knows what's coming. So he knows that the next day, Shaul will die, as he told him, will die in battle. When the king of Israel, wicked or righteous, it doesn't make a difference. When the king of Israel dies, it's a tremendous desecration of God's name. It's a Chil Hashem. Chil Hashem. So, he was afraid of judgment. God is going to say there's a Chil Hashem. So you might say, why is that his problem? Shmuel is already dead. Whether Shaul dies on battle, well, why is that his fault? So the answer is, because Shmuel anointed Shaul. Yeah, but they made him do it. He didn't want to do it. He said, you should only have God as your king. And but why did the people want to have a king? The people wanted the king because Banecha lo alchu b'drachecha. Your son Shmuel, one of them was Yoel. Your sons did not go in your ways. They didn't follow in your ways, Shmuel. So we need a king. We can't have you. You can't have your children. So you'd say, all right, he was a bad father. They didn't have good kids. Now wait a second. It's not true. The Gemara says in Shabbos, anyone who says that children of Shmuel sinned, they're mistaken. So why does the Torah say they sinned? Why does the Shmuel say they sinned? It says they sinned, it means that they weren't as righteous as their father. What did their father do? Their father, he had a very special status. He was, Shmuel was V'savav, Beitel, and Dvor Amata. He always came back home. Why did he come back home? Because he didn't want to eat in anyone's house. You know, there were other people like Elisha the prophet, unbelievable prophet, but he ate in other people's houses. But Shmuel refused to eat in anyone's house. He didn't want to take anything from anyone else. After all, he's a judge. So his sons, it says they took bribes. They didn't take bribes. They allowed themselves to eat in other people's houses. So given that the standards were so high that a judge shouldn't eat in someone's house, since the children ate in someone's house, people said, they're not going in your ways. So Shmuel said, okay, so what happened was as follows. I was trying to be super righteous. I would not accept even a meal from a lay person, lest I be their judge. My children were not as righteous. So maybe because I was so super punctilious, beyond what I needed to be, that gave the wrong impression that my children were not righteous. Therefore, I could not continue, they could not continue as leaders, and therefore we had to find someone else, and therefore we appointed Shaul. Why did Shaul die? Not because he sinned, because really David has to be the king. As the Barbanel explains, and the Chassam Sofer quotes it, David was destined to take over at a certain point. And ideally, Shmuel would have filled the gap until he got there. But because he was extra machmir, he was extra careful, Shmuel was so punctilious, his sons looked bad. Because his sons looked bad, they had to appoint Shaul. But then Shaul had to go away because it was the time for David. So Shaul had to die in battle. One kingship, one time cannot hit the other. It was time for David. So Shaul had to go to pasture. So he had to die, and it was a chil Hashem. He died in battle. That's a disgrace of God's name. So whose fault is it? Shmuel. Why? Because he was extra strict. So he was worried about judgment. So he says, well, I'm going to bring Moshe with me. Moshe will come with me to the judgment, and everything will be fine. How does bringing Moshe help you? He said, I'll show him that I didn't change anything. Well, of course, you're Shmuel, you're very righteous, you didn't change anything. He says, no. You think that I changed something, that I was extra careful, that I did something so punctilious that it led people to say that my children were not as punctilious, and therefore they were not righteous, and therefore you needed to have a new king, and therefore we had Saul, and Saul had to die to make room for David. You think it's all my fault because I was so punctilious? No, I didn't change anything. I'm exactly as punctilious as Moshe. So you say, well, you don't need Moshe for that. You bring a pasuk. The pasuk says, Lo chamor echad mehem nasati. Moshe turns to Korach and he says, look, are you kidding me? You're accusing me of doing something wrong? I never even took one donkey. When I went back to get my wife, I didn't take the corporate car. I took my own donkey. I didn't take one donkey. So why didn't Shmuel bring a proof from that pasuk that he didn't do anything extra punctilious? He was following the footsteps of Moshe. Moshe didn't take one iota from the Jews. Shmuel didn't take one iota from the Jews. Yeah, but he couldn't bring a raya, couldn't bring a proof from the pasuk, from the verse, because it says in Megillah that the Jews in the days of Talmai HaMelech, the Shivim, the Septuagint, the 70 elders, they changed the Torah, and they changed it from I did not take one donkey to I didn't take one chemed, one desired thing. I didn't take one penny. Not only I didn't take a donkey, which maybe cost $500, I didn't even take one desirable thing. I didn't take a $20 tip. I didn't take anything. So he says, I can't bring the verse as a proof. I'm going to have to bring Moshe himself to tell everyone that he never took anything. He didn't even take a chamor or a chemed, a donkey, or even a small bribe, a small, gratuity. He didn't take anything. So therefore, that would prove that Shmuel didn't do anything wrong, and therefore, the fact that his sons didn't go in his ways is not his fault. He was just trying to be just like his Rebbe, just like Moshe Rabbeinu. After all, Moshe is on this pedestal, and Shmuel is parallel to them. Shmuel is even equal to Moshe and Aaron. Shmuel is a very high level, not quite like Moshe, but almost like Moshe Rabbeinu. Now, what is the lesson here? So I'd like to suggest the following. Sometimes in life we may take on certain stringencies, and you may say that person is changing the Torah. In fact, some Sofers have been accused of that after all, he's so strict. Some people were trying to start certain reforms in the 19th century, and he was so strict he wouldn't let them change anything. And people said that he was being too strict, that he created new chumras and new stringencies. So some Sofer could say, no, I'm not changing anything. I'm going the ways of my father. How do we know whether a chumrah, whether a stringency, whether a punctilious behavior, whether when you take on an extra stringency, an extra measure of piety in your life, how do we know if you've gone too far, if you've basically added to the Torah, or know that you're going in the ways of your forefathers? You know how we know? We know if we can model it after those who came before. If you say that what I'm doing is something that Moshe Rabbeinu did, that my Rebbe did, my grand Rebbe, my grandfather, that they did, then I haven't gone too far. I haven't changed anything new. But he's also telling us the dangers. If you don't take that approach, if you do something which, it seems very nice, it's not taking a penny, but then it creates a standard that's hard to follow. You break the tradition. Here, everyone's going along in the tradition. The one person goes beyond the tradition, then those who follow have trouble following. It creates too much. So So Chassam Sofer says that Shmuel found just the right balance. Yes, he was very punctilious, but he didn't do one thing that he hadn't seen from his Rebbe, from Moshe Rabbeinu. All of our Rebbes, our master Rebbe, Moshe Rabbeinu, he already saw that model of someone who's squeaky clean. He was so clean that he didn't even take as much as a tip from anybody. And therefore, when Shmuel says, I do extra punctilious things, I'm not adding to the Torah. My stringencies are not in addition to the Torah. They are exactly in line with the Torah because they come from my ancestors. They come from the best of them all, the best of the best, come from Moshe Rabbeinu. And therefore, Shmuel doesn't have to worry. No one can accuse him of doing the wrong thing. Shmuel did the right thing. And so our lesson for today is the idea that it's okay to be extra stringent. We want to make sure that that's in line with those who came before us, that it has some basis in those who came before us. We don't want to go too far, because then we create a standard that perhaps the children can't follow, a standard that's too much. But as long as we're in the footsteps of our parents, no one should be able to complain. If we want to try to reach the highest levels, he tried to reach the level of Moshe. Shmuel succeeded, and that's okay. In the end, Shmuel was not judged negatively. Shmuel had Moshe on his side, and Shmuel indeed had the great legacy of anointing not only King Saul, but also of anointing David, who after all was the greatest Kiddush Hashem, the greatest sanctification of God's name. And one day, his great-great-grandchild, the Mashiach, will bring a sanctification of God's name which will undo all the Chil Hashem, all the defilement of God's name that went on throughout the generations as described in Yechezkel. And V'Yikadishtem, who will be sanctified, Yikadel V'Yikadesh, God's name will be made great, holy, once again, in the end of days, through this protege of Shmuel, known as King David, known as the Messiah, King of Israel. Thank you for joining us here at the Anshe Sfar Beth Lemeth congregation for our discussion of the Parsha, the various holidays. And join us each week for a discussion of the holidays, how-to videos as well. And join us for our classes as well, which we recently instituted. Thank you.